Sisters and brothers, the Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. As Jesus continued his journey to Jerusalem, he traveled through Samaria and Galilee. As he was entering a village, 10 lepers met him. They stood at a distance from him and raised their voice, saying, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." As they were going, they were cleansed. And one of them, realizing that he had been healed, returned, glorifying God in a loud voice. And he fell at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. And Jesus said in reply, 10 were cleansed, were they not? Where are the other 9? Has none but this foreigner returned to give thanks to God? And then he said to him, "Stand up and go. Your faith has saved you." The Gospel of the Lord. The readings today speak to us of the importance of gratitude. And I first want to begin by expressing my gratitude to all of you for your prayers for my mom and for my family. This past Tuesday, we laid my mom to rest peacefully, prayerfully, and simply, as she had requested. And the peace and even the joy that my brother and sisters and I experienced at her funeral were in part due to a faith in God's goodness and care that our mom has always imparted to us throughout her life, but also the fruit of your prayers. And in my name and in that of my siblings, I express our gratitude for your kindness to us. Gratitude is a virtue. And the Roman philosopher Cicero once said that gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but it is the parent of all virtues. And it would seem that the scriptures today would confirm that intuition of Cicero. In the first reading, we hear the story of Naaman. And Naaman was an army commander from Syria who had contracted leprosy. And he heard that there was a prophet in Israel through whom God worked mighty deeds. And so he set out at great expense to find this prophet, Elisha. And when he does find Elisha, he gives him a very simple order. Elisha tells him to go and to wash 7 times in the River Jordan. And the River Jordan at that time was a dirty and a polluted river. And when Naaman first hears Elisha's command, he balks at it, because he expected him to ask him to do something rather extraordinary. But instead, he tells him to simply go down and to wash in the muddy waters of the River Jordan. But his servants reasoned with him that if the prophet had asked him to do something difficult or strange, he would have gladly done it, because the prophet had told him to do it. And so Naaman washes 7 times in the Jordan, and he is cleansed, he is cured of his leprosy. And Naaman recognized that God had touched him through his prophet, and he accepts the God of Israel as the one true God. He even takes 2 mule loads of dirt back home with him so that he could continue to thank and worship the God of Israel on his own soil for the rest of his life. And then in the gospel, we have the beautiful and the very familiar story of the Samaritan who was healed of his leprosy. But actually, 10 lepers came to Jesus. 9 of them were Jewish, 1 of them a Samaritan. And they all recognized that Jesus is a holy man, a man of God, and they come to him asking him to have pity, to show mercy to them. And like in the story of Naaman, Jesus tells them to do something very simple. He tells them to go and to present themselves to the priest. Leprosy in biblical times was a dreaded disease. Anyone who was even suspected of having leprosy immediately became an outcast, a pariah in society. That person had to live outside the village. The leper wore a bell around his or her neck so that if anyone came upon him unexpectedly, the leper was expected to ring the bell and shout, "Unclean, unclean." And in the unlikely event that a leper was cured, he had to first go and show himself to the priest, who would examine him and then verify that he had been healed, and then and only then could the person return to family, to friends, to the community. Lepers often banded together for protection and to find food and to support one another. And that explains the band of lepers that approaches Jesus and asks him to be merciful to them. And Jesus responds by telling them to go and to present themselves to the priest, which presumed the fact that they would be healed. And so it was. And then one, and only one, returns to thank Jesus for the healing that literally restored him to life. And then Jesus asked that haunting question, were not 10 made whole? Where are the other 9? And the one who returns is a Samaritan, detested by the Jews. And the scriptures today hold up Naaman the Syrian and the leper who was a Samaritan as examples to us because of that right relationship they had with God, which was a relationship of gratitude. They recognized that they were in God's debt. The point in both cases is made to a Jewish audience, the very ones who had the most to be grateful for as the chosen people, who more often than not failed to express their gratitude for God's incredible blessings to them. I would compare the experience of Naaman and the Samaritan and the gratitude that they felt to people who have recovered from a very serious illness, a life-threatening illness. After recovering from that kind of illness where life and death are in the balance, all of the things that make up our ordinary life suddenly become manifestations of God's goodness. And people who have recovered from a very serious illness are filled with a sense of awe and gratitude for everything. They recognize everything for the gift that it is. And this is the attitude with which we are called to live our lives always. This is the virtue of gratitude, recognizing all those things that we usually take for granted for what they are, amazing gifts from a loving God. What does St. Paul tell us in his first letter to the Thessalonians? Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you. Gratitude is a virtue, and a virtue is a good habit that is cultivated in our life in such a way that it simply becomes second nature. A vice, on the other hand, is a bad habit that is cultivated in such a way that it becomes second nature. Unfortunately, the vice of ingratitude may be more prominent in our lives than the virtue of gratitude. I don't know about you, but most days I spend more time complaining than thanking God. The result of original sin was that things got all mixed up in our lives. Virtues that were meant to be natural to us were replaced by vices that instead, to our detriment, have become natural to us. And the great challenge of our Christian life is to nurture those virtues that Jesus tells us are part of the new man and the new woman, part of being a new creation. And gratitude is certainly one of those very important virtues. The Canadian-American evangelist Harry Ironside told the story of going into a very crowded restaurant at lunch one day to have a meal. A man approached Ironside and asked if he could share the table with him as the restaurant was very, very crowded. And Ironside welcomed him. And then, as was his custom, Ironside bowed his head in prayer before beginning his meal. And when he opened his eyes, the man at table with him asked him if he had a headache. And Ironside assured him that he was fine. And the man asked if there was something wrong with his food. And again, Ironside assured him that the food was fine. And then he explained to the man that he was simply thanking God, as he always did before he ate a meal. And the man recoiled at that and told Ironside that he didn't have to thank anyone for the food he ate. He had earned it. He had earned everything he had by the sweat of his brow. When I sit down to eat, he told Ironside, I just start eating. And Ironside responded, "Ah, yes, that's just what my dog does." The English writer and philosopher G.K. Chesterton had obviously cultivated the virtue of gratitude in his life, for he once wrote, "You say grace before meals, and that is good. But I say grace before the concert and the opera, and I say grace before the play and the pantomime. I say grace before I open a book to read, and grace before sketching or painting or swimming or fencing or boxing or walking or playing or dancing. I say grace before I dip the pen in ink. All is gift, and we are called in all circumstances to be grateful." It's not only a virtue, but it's the parent of all virtues. It puts us in a right relationship with God and with the people in our lives. The Samaritan in today's gospel discovered that while 10 lepers were healed, only one was saved, and that was the one who returned to say thank you, for he was in that right relationship with God. Oftentimes we live our lives in such a way that we think that God should be in our debt, but the reality is each and every moment of our life, we are in God's debt. And this is the right relationship that gratitude expresses. Jesus, the night before he died, gave us a gift. It was the great gift of the Eucharist. And the very word Eucharist means thanksgiving. In this gift, our thanksgiving, however imperfect, is joined to the perfect thanksgiving of Jesus. And by grace, we too become an acceptable offering to the Father. To live in gratitude puts us in a right relationship with God. And in this right relationship is our salvation. When Jesus gave us the Eucharist, it's as if he gave us some of the very soil of Calvary. And at every Mass, we are able to stand on this soil. We stand on this soil and we thank God for the greatest of all gifts, and that is the gift of eternal salvation in Christ Jesus. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said that if the stars came out only one night a year, we would stay up all night to look at them. But because we've seen them so often, we don't even bother to look at them anymore. How easily we grow accustomed to our blessings and forget to give thanks for them. How easily we become accustomed to the blessing of eternal life that God has given us in Jesus, and we forget even on Sunday to give thanks for this blessing. And so let us cultivate the virtue of gratitude. May no day pass in which we don't thank God for something. And better yet, let us be grateful for everything is gift. We take our blessings for granted. You know, as I had the privilege of being with my mom a week ago Friday when she took her last breath, I understood just how true that is. Everything, absolutely everything, is gift from God. Like Naaman and the Samaritan, may we always be grateful. May we give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God for us.